Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 11, Chapter 23, The Song of the Avantī Brāhmaṇa. This chapter tells the story of a mendicant sannyāsī from the Avantī country as an example of how one should tolerate the disturbances and offenses created by evil persons. The harsh words of uncalled persons pierce the heart even more severely than arrows. Yet a mendicant Brahmana from the city of Avantī, even while being attacked by wicked men, considered this trouble to be simply the consequence of his own past deeds and tolerated it with utmost sobriety. Previously, the Brahmana had been an agriculturalist and merchant. He had been extremely greedy, miserly, and prone to anger. As a result, his wife, sons, daughters, relatives, and servants were all deprived of every kind of enjoyment and gradually came to behave unaffectionately toward him. In due course of time, thieves, family members, and providence took away the sum total of his wealth. Finding himself without any property and abandoned by everyone, the Brahmana developed a deep sense of renunciation. He considered how the earning and preservation of wealth involved great effort, fear, anxiety, and confusion. Because of wealth, there arise 15 unwanted items: thievery, violence, lying, deception, lust, anger, pride, feverishness, disagreement, hatred, distrust, conflict, attachment to women, gambling, and intoxication. When this meditation arose in his heart, the Brahmana could understand that the Supreme Lord Śrī Hari had somehow become satisfied with him. He felt that only because the Lord was pleased with him had the apparently unfavorable turn of events in his life occurred. He was grateful that a sense of detachment had arisen in his heart and considered it the factual means for delivering his soul. In this condition, he determined to engage the duration of his life in the worship of Lord Hari, and thus accepted the mendicant order of tridaṇḍi-sannyāsa. Subsequently, he would enter different villages to beg charity, but the people would harass and disturb him. But he simply tolerated all this, remaining firm as a mountain. He remained fixed in his chosen spiritual practice and sang a song renowned as the Bhikṣu-gīta. Neither mortal persons, the demigods, the soul, the ruling planets, the reactions of work, nor time are the causes of one's happiness and distress. Rather, the mind alone is their cause, because it is the mind that makes the spiritual soul wander in the cycle of material life. The real purpose of all charity, religiosity, and so forth is to bring the mind under control. A person who has already composed his mind in meditation has no need for these other processes, and for a person who is incapable of fixing his mind, they are of no practical use. The false conception of material ego binds the transcendental soul to material sense objects. The Avantī Brahmana therefore became determined to bring himself over the insurmountable ocean of material existence by rendering service to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord Mukunda, with the same perfect faith in the Lord exhibited by the great devotees of the past. Only when one can focus his intelligence on the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead can the mind be completely subdued. This is the essence of all practical prescriptions for spiritual advancement. Text 1. Shibhadaraya nirvacha saevam asamshita udhavena bhagavata mukyena dasharha mukyaha sabhajayan bhritya vacho mukundas tam abhashe shravaniya vidyaha. Translation. Shukadeva Goswami said, Lord Mukunda, the chief of the Dasharhas, having thus been respectfully requested the best of his devotees, Sri Uddhava first acknowledged the fitness of his servant's statements. Then the Lord, whose glorious exploits are most worthy of being heard, began to reply to him. Text 2. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Barhaspatya Nasti Atra Sadurvai Durjaneritaihi Duruktair Bhinnam Atmanam Yaha Samadhatum Ishvaraha. Translation. Lord Shri Krishna said, O disciple of Brihaspati, there is virtually no saintly man in this world capable of resettling his own mind after it has been disturbed by the insulting words of uncivilized men. Lord Shri Krishna said, O disciple of Brihaspati, there is virtually no saintly man in this world capable of resettling his own mind after it has been disturbed by the insulting words of uncivilized men. Purport: in the modern age, there is widespread propaganda ridiculing the path of spiritual realization, and thus even saintly devotees are disturbed to see the progress of human society being obstructed. Still, a devotee of the Lord must tolerate any personal insult, though he cannot tolerate offense against the Lord himself or the Lord's pure devotee. Text 3. Na tatha tapyate vithaha puman banaistu marmagaihi yatha tudanti marmastha hyasa asatam parusheshahavaha. Translation: sharp arrows which pierce one's chest and reach the heart do not cause as much suffering as the arrows of harsh insulting words that become lodged within the heart when spoken by uncivilized men. Text 4. Kathayanti mahat punyam itihasam mihodhavaha ha yuhodhava tammaham varnayishyami nibodha susamahitaha. Translation: my dear Uddhava, in this regard a most pious story is told, and I shall now describe it to you. Please listen with careful attention. Purport: the Lord will now relate to Uddhava a historical account which teaches how to tolerate the insults of others. Text 5. Kenachit bhikṣuna gitam paribhutena durjanaihi smaratha dhriti yuktena vipakam nija karmanam. Translation: once a certain sannyāsī was insulted in many ways by impious men. However, with determination he remembered that he was suffering the fruit of his own previous karma. I will narrate to you his story and that which he spoke. Purport: Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur comments as follows: often those who give up the materialistic path and devote themselves to renunciation are attacked by impious persons. This analysis, however, is superficial, since the punishment is actually the cumulative result of one's past karma. Since some renunciants show lack of tolerance when presented with the remnants of their previous sins and thus are forced to enter again into the path of impious life, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore instructs that one should become as tolerant as a tree. If a native on the path of devotional service to the Lord's pure devotee is attacked by envious persons, he must accept it as a consequence of his previous fruitive activities. One should be intelligent and avoid future unhappiness by rejecting the ethic of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If one refuses to enter into enmity with envious men, they will automatically leave him alone. Text 6. Avantī dvijaha kaschit ashit atyatmanaha shriyaha varta vrittihi kadaryastu kami luptoti kopanaha. Translation: in the country of Avantī, there once lived a certain Brāhmaṇa who was very rich and gifted with all opulences, and who was engaged in the occupation of commerce. But he was a miserly person, lusty, greedy, and very prone to anger. Purport: according to Srila Sridhar Swami, the Avantī country is the district of Malwa. This Brāhmana was extremely wealthy, doing business in agriculture, banking, and so on. Being a miser, he suffered agony when his hard-earned wealth was lost, as will be described by the Lord himself. Text 7. Yatayotithayastasya vanmatrenapi narchitaha sunyavasatha atmapi kale kamair anarchitaha. Translation: in his home, devoid of religiosity and lawful sense gratification, the family members and guests were never properly respected, even with words. He would not even allow sufficient gratification for his own body at the suitable times. Text 8. Dushilasya kadaryasya druhyante putra bandhavaha dara dushitaro bharatya vishanna nacharan priyam. Translation: since he was so hard-hearted and miserly, his sons-in-laws, wife, daughters, and servants began to feel inimical toward him. Becoming disgusted, they would never treat him with affection. Text 9. Tasyaivam yakshavat vittasya chutasyophaya lokataha dharma kama vihinasya chukruthu panchabhajinaha. Translation: in this way, the presiding deities of the five family sacrifices became angry at the Brāhmaṇa, who being niggardly guarded with wealth like a yaksha who had no good destination either in this world or the next, and who was totally deprived of religiosity and sense enjoyment. Text 10. Tad avatyana vishrasta punyaskandasya bhurida artopi agachan nidhanam bhavyayasa parishramah. Translation: O magnanimous Uddhava, by his neglect of these demigods, he depleted his stock of piety and all his wealth. The accumulation of his repeated exhaustive endeavors was totally lost. Purport: the Brahmana's stock of piety became like a withered branch that no longer gives fruits or flowers. Srila Jiva Goswami comments that the Brahmana had a trace of piety directed at the Supreme Lord with hopes of liberation. That pure portion of the branch of his piety remained unwithered, eventually giving the fruit of knowledge. Text 11. Yatyo jagruhu kinchit kinchit tasyava uthava daivataha kalataha kinchit brahma bandhor nirparthivat. Translation: some of the wealth of this so-called Brahmana was taken away by his relatives. My dear Uddhava, some by thieves, some by the whims of providence, some by the effects of time, some by ordinary men, and some by government authorities. Purport: it appears that even though the so-called Brahmana was determined not to spend his money, his wife and other relatives managed to squeeze out a portion. According to Srila Sridhar Swami, providence here refers to fires in the home and other types of occasional misfortune. Effects of time here refers to the destruction of agricultural crops through seasonal irregularities and other such occurrences. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur points out that one should not merely proclaim oneself to be a Brahmana, but should actually understand one's original identity as a servant of the Lord. One declaring himself to be a Brahmana but maintaining a materialistic mentality is not a real Brahmana, but rather a Brahma Bantu or so-called Brahmana. The humble devotees of Lord Vishnu, following the indications of the Vedic scriptures, refer to themselves as unfortunate and unable to understand the kingdom of God. They do not proudly proclaim themselves to be Brahmanas. Those who are wise, however, know that such humble devotees are actually Brahmins whose hearts are cleansed by the pure mode of goodness. Text 12. Saevam dravine nashte dharma kama vivarjitaha Upekshitascha svajjanais chintam apaduratyayam. Translation: finally, when his property was completely lost, he who never engaged in religiosity or sense enjoyment became ignored by his family members. Thus he began to feel unbearable anxiety. Text 13. Tasyaivam dhyayato dirgham Nashtarayastapasvinaha kidyato baspa kanthasya nirvedaha summahan abhut. Translation: having lost all his wealth, he felt great pain and lamentation. His throat choked up with tears, and he meditated for a long time on his fortune. Then a powerful feeling of renunciation came over him. Purport: the Brahmana had previously been trained in pious life, but his past goodness was covered by his offensive behavior. Finally, his previous purity was reawakened within him. Text 14. Cha sa chahedam aho kashtam vrihatma me nutapitaha na dharmaya na kamaya yasharthaya sa idrishaha. Translation. The Brahmana spoke as follows: "Oh, what great misfortune! I have simply tormented myself uselessly, struggling so hard for money that was not even intended for religiosity or material enjoyment." The Brahmana spoke as follows: "Oh, what great misfortune! I have simply tormented myself uselessly, struggling so hard for money that was not even intended for religiosity or material enjoyment." Text 15. Prayenarthaha kadaryanam na sukkaya kadachana ihachatmopatapaya mritascha narakaya cha. Translation. Generally, the wealth of misers never allows them any happiness. In this life, it causes their self-torment, and when they die, it sends them to hell. Purport. A miser is afraid to spend his money even for obligatory religious and social duties. Offending God and people in general, he goes to hell. Text 16. Yaso yasashvinam shuddham shlakyaye guninam gunaha lobhasvalpopitan hanti svitro rupam ivipshitam. Translation. Whatever pure fame is possessed by the famous, and whatever praiseworthy qualities are found in the virtues, are destroyed by even a small amount of greed, just as one's attractive physical beauty is ruined by a trace of white leprosy. Whatever pure fame is possessed by the famous, and whatever praiseworthy qualities are found in the virtues, are destroyed by even a small amount of greed, just as one's attractive physical beauty is ruined by a trace of white leprosy. Text 17. Arthasya sadhane siddhe utkarshe rakshane vyaye nashopa bhogo ayasas trasas chinta brahmo nirnam. Translation. In the earring, attainment, increase, protection, expense, loss, and enjoyment of wealth, all men experience great labor, fear, anxiety, and delusion. Text 18 to 19. Steyam him sanritam dambhaha kamaha krodha smayo madaha bhedo vairam avishvasaha spardha vyasanani cha ete panchadasha nartha hyartha mula mata nirnam tasmad anartam arthakyam shreyorti duratas tyajet. Translation. Theft, violence, speaking lies, duplicity, lust, anger, perplexity, pride, quarreling, enmity, fearlessness, envy, and the dangers caused by women, gambling, and intoxication are the 15 undesirable qualities that contaminate men because of greed for wealth. Although these qualities are undesirable, men falsely ascribe value to them. One desiring to achieve the real benefit of life should therefore remain aloof from undesirable material wealth. Purport. The words anartam, arthakyam, or undesirable wealth indicate wealth that cannot be efficiently engaged in the loving service of the Lord. Such superfluous money or property will undoubtedly pollute a man with all of the above mentioned qualities, and therefore should be given up. Text 20. Pityante prataro daraha pitaraha suhrudastatha ekashnitha kakinina satyaha sarverayah kritaha. Translation. Even a man's brothers, wife, parents, and friends united with him in love will immediately break off their affectionate relationship and become enemies over a single coin. Text 21. Arthenalpiyas yasahyete samrabdha diptamanyavaha Tyajanti asu spridho grananti sahasotsrja sauhridam. Translation. For even a small amount of money, these relatives and friends become very agitated and their anger is inflamed. Acting as rivals, they quickly give up all sentiments of goodwill and will reject one at a moment's notice, even to the point of committing murder. Text 22. Labdha janma mara prartyam manushyam tat vijagvyatam tat anadrityaye svartam nanti yanti ashubham gatim. Translation. Those who obtain human life, which is prayed for even by the demigods, and in that human birth become situated as first-class Brahmins, are extremely fortunate. If they disregard this important opportunity, they are certainly killing their own self-interest and thus achieve a most unfortunate end. Those who obtain human life, which is prayed for even by the demigods, and in that human birth become situated as first-class Brahmins, are extremely fortunate. If they disregard this important opportunity, they are certainly killing their own self-interest and thus achieve a most unfortunate end. Purport. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur comments as follows. Human birth is better than that of the demigods, ghosts, spirits, animals, trees, lifeless stones, and so forth. Because the demigods simply enjoy celestial pleasures, and in other forms of life there is excessive suffering. It is only in human life that one deeply considers one's ultimate benefit in life. Human birth is therefore more desirable than even that of the demigods. Within human life, the position of a high-class Brahmana is certainly most desirable. If a Brahmana, however, gives up the devotional service of the Lord and works hard like a Shudra simply for the prestige of his community, he is certainly on the platform of material sense gratification. The special qualification of the Brahmana is the spiritual knowledge by which they recognize every living entity to be an eternal servant of the Lord. A Brahmana free from false ego thus feels himself lower than a blade of grass and tolerantly offers respect to all living entities. All human beings, and especially the Brahmins, should avoid becoming killers of their own self-interest by neglecting Krishna consciousness, the loving service of the Lord. Such neglect paves the way for future suffering. Text 20. Svarga pavargayor dvaram prapya lokam imam puman dravine ko nushacheta martyo narthasya damani. Translation. What mortal man, having achieved this human life, which is the very gateway to both heaven and liberation, would willingly become attached to that abode of worthlessness, material property? Purport. That which one intends to use for one's personal sense gratification is called material property, whereas paraphernalia to be used in the Lord's loving service is understood to be spiritual. One should give up all one's material property by utilizing it completely in the devotional service of the Lord. A person who owns a luxurious mansion should install the deity of the Lord and hold regular programs to propagate Krishna consciousness. Similarly, wealth should be used to build temples of the Lord and publish literature scientifically explaining the personality of Godhead. One who blindly renounces material property without utilizing it in the service of the Lord does not understand that everything belongs to the personality of Godhead. Such blind renunciation is based on the material idea that this property could belong to me, but I don't want it. Everything in fact belongs to God. Knowing this, one neither tries to enjoy nor to reject the things of this world, but peacefully engage them in the service of the Lord. Text 24. Devarshi pitrabhutani yatin bandhumscha bhaginaha asam vidbhaja chatmaninam yakshavittaha patatyathaha. Translation. One who fails to distribute his wealth to the proper shareholders, the demigods, sage, forefathers, and ordinary living entities, as well as his immediate relatives, in laws and own self, is maintaining his wealth simply like a yaksha and will fall down. Purport: one who does not share his wealth with the above-mentioned authorized persons and does not even enjoy the wealth himself will certainly suffer unlimited problems in life. Text 25. Vyarthayarthehaya vittam pramattasya vayobalam kushalayena sityanti jaratha kimnu sadhaye. Translation: discriminating persons are able to utilize their money, youth, and strength to achieve perfection, but I have feverishly squandered these in the useless endeavor for further wealth. Now that I am an old man, what can I achieve? Text 26. Kasmat sanklishyate vidvan vyarthayarthehaya sakrit kasya chinmayaya nunam lokoyam suvimohitaha. Translation: why must an intelligent man suffer by his constant vain efforts to get wealth? Indeed, this whole world is most bewildered by someone's illusory potency. Text 27. Kim danayir dayirva kim kamayirva kamadayirta mrityuna grasya manasya karma pirvota janmadaihi. Translation: for one who is in the grips of death, what is the use of wealth or those who offer it, sense gratification or those who offer it, or for that matter, any type of fruitive activity which simply causes one to take birth in the material world? For one who is in the grips of death, what is the use of wealth or those who offer it, sense gratification or those who offer it, or for that matter, any type of fruitive activity which simply causes one to again take birth in the material world? Text 28. Nunam me bhagavam stushtaha sarvadeva mayo harihi yena nito dashametam nirvedaschatmanaha plavaha. Translation: the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Hari, who contains within himself all the demigods, must be satisfied with me. Indeed, he has brought me to this suffering condition and foreseed me to experience detachment, which is the boat to carry me over this ocean of material life. Purport: the Brāhmaṇa could understand that the demigods who award different types of sense gratification as the result of one's fruitive activities cannot bestow the highest benefit in life. When the Brāhmana lost all his property, he could understand that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he comprised all the demigods, had given him the highest perfection, not by awarding sense gratification, but by saving him from the ocean of material enjoyment. Being thus deprived of the opportunity to cultivate religiosity, wealth, sense gratification, and liberation, the Brāhmana became detached, and transcendental knowledge awakened within his heart. Text 29. Soham kalavasheshena shoshaishen gam atmanaha apramatto kilasvarte yadisyat sitha atmani. Translation: if there is any time remaining in my life, I will perform austerities and force my body to subsist on the bare necessities. Without further confusion, I shall pursue that which constitutes my entire self-interest in life, and I shall remain satisfied with the self. Text 30. Tatra mam anumoderan devastri bhuvaneshwaraha muhurtena brahmalokam katvangaha samasadhayat. Translation: thus may the presiding demigods of these three worlds kindly show their mercy upon me. Indeed, Maharaja Katvanga was able to achieve the spiritual world in a single moment. Purport: the Brāhmana of Avantī thought that although he was an old man who might die at any moment, he could follow the example of Maharaja Katvanga, who achieved the Lord's mercy in a single moment. Maharaja Katvanga, as described in the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, fought valiantly on behalf of the demigods, and they offered the king any benediction he might desire. Khatvanga Maharaj chose to find out the remaining duration of his life, which unfortunately was a single moment. The king therefore immediately surrendered to Lord Krishna and achieved the spiritual world. The Brāhmaṇa of Avantī desired to follow this example, as the blessings of the demigods are all devotees of the Lord. He hoped to become fully Krishna conscious before giving up his body. Text 31. Shri Bhagavan Vacha iti abhipritya manasa hi avantyo dvija sattamaha unmucha hridaya grantin shanto bhikṣur abhun munihi. Translation. Lord Shri Krishna continued, his mind thus determined that most excellent Avantī Brāhmana was able to untie the knots of desire within his heart. He then assumed the role of a peaceful and silent sannyāsī mendicant. Text 32. Sacha chara mahimita samyatat mindriya nilaha bhikshartham nagara gramam asango lakshita vishat. Translation. He wandered about the earth, keeping his intelligence, senses, and life air under control. To beg charity, he traveled alone to various cities and villages. He did not advertise his advanced spiritual position and thus was not recognized by others. Purport. According to Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur, the acceptance of the tridaṇḍi-sannyāsa order of life is the chief indication that one has actually taken shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The three rods of the danda or staff of the Vaishnava sannyasi indicate control of the body, mind, and words by engaging them only in the loving service of the Lord. This procedure helps one to become more tolerant than a tree, as recommended by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. By strict control of one's body, mind, and speech, the good quality of tolerance becomes strengthened, and thus one manifests the further qualities of forgiving others, never wasting one's time. Detachment from this gratification, lack of false pride in one's work, and not hankering for liberation. One in this way gives up the mentality of materialistic persons who establish so-called affectionate relationships of mutual flattery and exploit each other for sense gratification. One who adopts the strict path of Krishna consciousness, following in the footsteps of great souls, can achieve the shelter of the Lord. Text 33. Tam vai pravayasam bhikṣum avadutam asajajanaha drishtva parya bhavan bhadra bhaviti paribhutibhi. Translation. A kind Udava, seeing him as an old dirty beggar, rowdy persons would dishonor him with many insults. Text 34. Kechit trivinum jagrhur eke patram kamandalum pitham chaikeksha sutram cha kantham chiranikechana pradaya cha punastani darshitani adadurmunihe. Translation. Some of these persons would take away his sannyasi rod, and some the water pot which he was using as a begging bowl. Some took his deerskin seat, some his chanting beads, and some would steal his torn, ragged clothing. Displaying these things before him, they would pretend to offer them back, but would then hide them again. Some of these persons would take away his sannyasi rod, and some the water pot which he was using as a begging bowl. Some took his deerskin seat, some his chanting beads, and some would steal his torn, ragged clothing. Displaying these things before him, they would pretend to offer him back, but would then hide them again. Text 35. Annam cha bhaiksha sampannam punjanasya saritate mutrayanti cha papishtaha sthivanti asya cha murthani. Translation. When he was sitting on the bank of a river about to partake of the food that he had collected by his begging, such sinful rascals would come and pass urine on it, and they would dare to spit on his head. When he was sitting on the bank of a river about to partake of the food that he had collected by his begging, such sinful rascals would come and pass urine on it, and they would dare to spit on his head. Text 36. Yata vacham vachayanti tadayanti na vakti chet tari tarjayanti apare vakpihi stenoyam iti vadinaha bhatnanti rajvatam kechit bhatyatam iti. Translation: Although he had taken a vow of silence, they would try to make him speak, and if he did not speak, they would beat him with sticks. Others would chastise him, saying, "This man is just a thief," and others would bind him up with rope, shouting, "Tie him up, tie him up." Text 37. Shipanti ke vajananta esha dharmadvajaha sattaha shinavitta imam vrittim agrahitsva janochitaha. Translation: They would criticize and insult him again, saying, "This man is just a hypocrite and a cheat. He makes a business of religion simply because he lost all his wealth and his family threw him out." Text 38 to 39. Aho esha mahasaro drishtiman giriradiva maunena sathayati artham bhakavadritha nishchayaha iti ke vahasantinam eke durvatayanti cha tam babandur niruruthur yatha kridanakam dvijam. Translation: Some would ridicule him by saying, "Just see this greatly powerful sage. He is as steadfast as the Himalaya mountains. By practice of silence, he strives for his goal with great determination, just like a duck." Other persons would pass fuel air upon him, and sometimes others would bind this twice-born Brāhmaṇa in chains and keep him captive like a pet animal. Text 40. Evam sa bhautikam dukkam daivikam daihikam chayat bhoktavyam atmanodishtam praptam abhutyata. Translation: The Brāhmana understood that all his suffering from other living beings, from the higher forces of nature, and from his own body was unavoidable, being allotted to him by providence. Many cruel persons harassed the Brāhmana, and his own body caused him suffering in the form of fever, hunger, thirst, fatigue, etc. The higher forces of nature are those that cause excessive heat, cold, wind, and rain. The Brāhmana realized that his suffering was due to his false identification with his material body, and not to the interaction of his body with external phenomena. That rather than try to adjust his external situation, he tried to adjust his Krishna consciousness and thus realize his actual identity as eternal spirit soul. Text 41. Paribhuta imam gatham agayata narathamaihi patayat bhi swadharmasto dhritim ashtaya satvikim. Translation: Even while being insulted by these low-class men who were trying to effect his downfall, he remained steady in his spiritual duties. Fixing his resolution in the mode of goodness, he began to chant the following song. Even while being assaulted by these low-class men who were trying to effect his downfall, he remained steady in his spiritual duties. Fixing his resolution in the mode of goodness, he began to chant the following song. Purport: Resolution in the mode of goodness is described in Bhagavad-gīta. Dhrityaya dharayate manaha pranindriya kriyaha yogena vyabhicharena linya dhriti sa partha sattviki. O son of Pritha, that determination which is unbreakable, which is sustained with steadfastness by yoga practice and thus controls the mind, life, and the acts of the senses, is in the mode of goodness. O son of Pritha, that determination which is unbreakable, which is sustained with steadfastness, by yoga practice and thus controls the mind, life, and the acts of the senses is the mode of goodness. Atheists who are envious of the devotees of the Supreme Lord are called Narathamas, or the lowest of men, and undoubtedly are en route to hell. By all means at their disposal, they disturb the devotional service of the Lord, sometimes by direct attack and sometimes by mockery. The devotees, however, remain tolerant, fixing their determination in the mode of goodness, as described by Srila Rupa Goswami in Sri Upadeshamrita. Vacho vegam manasaha krodha vegam jiva vegam udaropasta vegam etan vegan yo vishaheta dhiraha sarvam api mam prithivim sa shishyat. As a sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urge of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world. Text 42. Dvija uvacha nayam jano me sukha dukkha hetur na deva tatma graha karma kalaha manaha param karanam amananti samsara chakram parivartayedyat. Translation. The Brāhmaṇa said, "These people are not the cause of my happiness and distress. Neither are the demigods, my own body, the planets, my past work or time. Rather, it is the mind alone that causes happiness and distress and perpetuates the rotation of material life." Text 43. Mano gunan vaisrijate baliyas tatascha karmani vilakshanani suklani krishnani athalohitani tebhyaha savarnaha srtayo bhavanti. Translation. The powerful mind actuates the functions of the material modes from which evolve the different kinds of material activities in the modes of goodness, ignorance, and passion. From the activities in each of these modes develop the corresponding statuses of life. Purport. In the mode of goodness, one considers oneself to be a saintly or wise person. In the mode of passion, one struggles for material success. And in the mode of ignorance, one becomes cruel, lazy, and sinful. By the combination of the material modes, one identifies oneself as a demigod, a king, a rich capitalist, a wise scholar, etc. These conceptions are material designations generated from the modes of nature, and they arrange themselves according to the tendency of the powerful mind to enjoy temporary sense gratification. The word baliyas in this verse, meaning very strong, indicates that the material mind becomes insensitive to intelligent advice. Even if we are informed that we are committing many sins and offenses in order to earn money, we may still think that money should be acquired at all costs, since without it one can neither perform religious ceremonies nor gratify the senses with beautiful women, mansions, and vehicles. Once the money is achieved, one suffers further problems, but the stubborn mind will never heed good advice in this regard. One must therefore give up mental concoction and control the mind in Krishna consciousness, as exemplified here by the Brāhmaṇa Avantī from Avantī. Text 44. Aniha atma manasa samihata hiranmayo matsaka udvishchaste manaha swalingam parigrihya kamam jushanyabhatha gunasangato sau. Translation. Although present along with the struggling mind within the material body, the super soul is not endeavoring because he is already endowed with transcendental enlightenment. Acting as my friend, he simply witnesses from his transcendental position. I, the infinitesimal spirit soul, on the other hand, have embraced this mind, which is the mirror reflecting the image of the material world. Thus I have become engaged in enjoying objects of desire and am entangled due to contact with the modes of nature. Although present along with the struggling mind within the material body, the Super-Soul is not endeavoring because he is already endowed with transcendental enlightenment. Acting as my friend, he simply witnesses from his transcendental position. I, the infinitesimal spirit soul, on the other hand, have embraced this mind which is the mirror reflecting the image of the material world. Thus I have become engaged in enjoying objects of desire and am entangled due to contact with the modes of nature. Text 45. Dhanam swadharmo niyamo yamascha shruta cha karmani cha satvratani sarve mano nigraha lakshananataha parohi yogo manasaha samadhi. Translation. Charity, prescribed duties, observance of major and minor regulative principles, hearing from scripture, pious works, and purifying vows, all have as their final aim the subduing of the mind. Indeed, concentration of the mind on the Supreme is the highest yoga. Charity, prescribed duties, observance of major and minor regulative principles, hearing from scripture, pious works, and purifying vows, all have as their final aim the subduing of the mind. Indeed, concentration of the mind on the Supreme is the highest goal. Highest yoga. Text 46. Samahitam yasya manaha prashantam dhanadibhika kim vadatasya krityam asamyatam yasya mano vinasyat dhanadibhischet aparam kimedbhi. Translation. If one's mind is perfectly fixed and pacified, then tell me what need does one have to perform ritualistic charity and other pious rituals? And if one's mind remains uncontrolled, lost in ignorance, then of what use are these engagements for him? Text 47. Manovashe nyehi abhavan smadeva manascha nanyasya vasam sameti bhishmo hi devaha sahasaha sahiyan yujat yasetam sahi devaha. Translation. All the senses have been under the control of the mind since time immemorial, and the mind himself never comes under the sway of any other. He is stronger than the strongest, and his godlike power is fearsome. Therefore, anyone who can bring the mind under control becomes the master of all the senses. Text 48. Tam durjayam satrum ashahya vegam aruntudam tanna vijitya kechit kurvanti asat vigraham atra martyair mitrani udasina ripun vimuthaha. Translation. Failing to conquer this irresponsible enemy, the mind, whose urges are intolerable and who torments the heart, many people are completely bewildered and create useless quarrel with others. Thus they conclude that other people are either their friends, their enemies, or parties indifferent to them. Purport. Falsely identifying oneself as the material body and accepting bodily expansions such as children and grandchildren to be one's eternal property, one completely forgets that every living being is qualitatively one with God. There is no essential difference between one individual being and another, since all are eternal expansions of the Supreme Lord. The mind observed in false ego creates the material body, and by identification with the body, the conditioned soul is overwhelmed by false pride and ignorance as described here. Text 49. Deham mano matram imam grihitva mamaham iti antatiyo manushyaha eshoham anyoyam iti brahmena duranta pare tamasi brahmanti. Translation. Persons who identify with this body, which is simply the product of the material mind, are blinded in their intelligence, thinking in terms of I and mine. Because of their illusion of this is I, but that is someone else. They wander in endless darkness. Text 50. Janastu hetu sukha dukkhayoschet kim atmanaschatra hi bhaumayostat jihvayam kvachit sandashati swadadphis tatvedanayam katamaya kupyet. Translation. If you say that these people are the cause of my happiness and distress, then where is the place of the soul in such this happiness and distress pertain not to the soul but to the interactions of material bodies. If someone bites his tongue with his own teeth, at whom can he become angry in his suffering? Purport. Although bodily pleasure and pain are felt by the soul, one must tolerate such duality, understanding it to be a creation of one's own material mind. If one accidentally bites his own tongue or similarly, all living beings are individual parts and parcels of God, and thus non-differing from each other. All of them are meant to serve the Supreme Lord in spiritual equality. If the living beings give up their master's service and instead quarrel among themselves, they will be forced to suffer by the laws of nature. If the conditioned souls establish artificial relationships of affection based on the material body and having nothing to do with God, if the conditioned souls establish artificial relationships of affection based on the material body and having nothing to do with God, then time itself will destroy such relationships and they will be subjected to further suffering. But if the individual living entities understand each other to be of the same family, all having connection with the Supreme Lord, their mutual friendship will develop. Thus one should not exhibit anger that will be harmful to oneself and others. Although the Brāhmaṇa was receiving kind offerings of charity from some people and being harassed and beaten by others, he denied that these people were the ultimate cause of his happiness and distress, for he was fixed on the platform of self-realization beyond the material body and mind. Text 51. Dukkasya heturyadi devatastu kim atmanastatra vikarayostat yad angam anjena nihanyate kvachit krutyeta kasmai purushaha swadehe. Translation. If you say that the demigods who rule the bodily senses cause suffering, still, how can such suffering apply to the spirit soul? This acting, the being acted upon, are merely interactions of the changeable senses and their presiding deities. When one limb of the body attacks another, with whom can the person in that body be angry? Purport. The Brāhmaṇa is elaborately explaining the condition of self-realization in which one understands oneself to be totally distinct from the material body and mind, and the demigods who control them. By cultivating bodily happiness, we are forced to accept bodily pain. Foolish conditioned souls endeavor to eliminate distress and enjoy happiness, but material happiness and distress are two sides of the same coin. One cannot relish bodily happiness without identifying oneself as the body. But as soon as such identification occurs, one is harassed by the innumerable pains and sufferings also inevitably present within the same body. Bodily happiness and distress are administered by the demigods who can never be brought under our control. Thus one remains subject to the whims of providence on the material platform. If, however, one surrenders to the personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, the reservoir of all pleasure, one can reach the spiritual platform, where transcendental bliss enlivens those liberated souls without any interrupting anxiety or unhappiness. Text 52. Atmayadi syat sukha dukkha hetuhu kimanyatas tatra nija svabhavaha nahi atmano yaditan mrishat syat krutyeta kasman na sukham na dukkham. Translation. If the soul himself were the cause of happiness and distress, then we could not blame others, since happiness and distress would be simply the nature of the soul. According to this theory, nothing except the soul actually exists, and if we were to perceive something besides the soul, that would be illusion. Therefore, since happiness and distress do not actually exist in this concept, why become angry at oneself or others? Purport. Because a dead body does not feel pleasure or pain, our happiness and distress are due to our own consciousness, which is the nature of the soul. It is not, however, the original function of the soul to enjoy material happiness and suffer material distress. These are products by ignorant material affection and enmity based on false ego. Our involvement in sense gratification drags our consciousness into the material body, where it is shocked by the inevitable bodily pains and problems. On the spiritual platform, there is neither material happiness nor distress, because there the living consciousness is fully engaged without personal desire in the devotion service of the Supreme Lord. This is the actual position of happiness, aloof from false bodily identification. Rather than uselessly becoming enraged with others for one's own foolishness, one should take to self-realization and solve the problems of life. Text 53. Graha nimittam sukha dukkhayoschet kimatmano jasya janasya te vai grahair grahasyaiva vadanti pidam krutyeta kasmai purushastatonyaha. Translation. And if we examine the hypothesis that the planets are the immediate cause of suffering and happiness, then also where is the relationship with the soul who is eternal? After all, the effect of the planets applies only to things that have taken birth. Expert astrologers have moreover explained how the planets are only causing pain to each other. Therefore, since the living entity is distinct from these planets and from the material body, against whom should he vent his anger? Kimatmanas tathi jaga jada jadatve tahasta chit purushoham saparnaha krudyeta kasmai nahi karma moolam. Translation. If we assume that fruitive work is the cause of happiness and distress, we still are not dealing with the soul. The idea of material work arises when there is a spiritual actor and a material body that undergoes the transformation of happiness and distress as a reaction to such work. Since the body has no life, it cannot be the actual recipient of happiness and distress, nor can the soul, who is ultimately completely spiritual and aloof from the material body. Since karma thus has no ultimate basis in either the body or the soul, at whom can one become angry? Purport. The material body is composed of earth, water, fire, and air, just like bricks, stones, and other objects. Our consciousness, falsely observed in the body, experiences happiness and distress, and free to work. Karma is performed when we falsely consider ourselves to be the enjoyers of the material world. False ego is thus the illusory combination within our minds of the self and the body, which are actually the two separate objects. Since karma or material work is based on illusory consciousness, these activities are also illusory and have no factual basis in either the body or the soul. When a conditioned soul falsely considers himself to be the body and consequently the enjoyer of the material body, he tries to find pleasure in illicit connection with women. Such sinful activity is based on his false concept of being the body and thus the enjoyer of women and of the world. Since he is not the body, his activity of enjoying a woman does not actually. There is merely the interaction of two machines, namely the two bodies, and the interaction of the illusory consciousness of men and women. The sensation of illicit sex occurs within the material body and is falsely assimilated by the false ego as its own experience. Thus the miserable or pleasurable reactions of karma ultimately act upon the false ego and not upon the body, which is composed of dull matter, nor upon the soul, which has nothing to do with matter. False ego is the illusory concoction of the mind. It is specifically this false ego that is suffering happiness and distress. The soul cannot become angry at others, since he is not personally enjoying or suffering. Rather, the false ego is doing this.